Hey, boys and girls. I'm going to start reading again. We are at chapter 23, The Badlands, and that is page 142 in my book. I'm going to try to read like 5 chapters on this video, maybe the next on the other video. We'll see. Week 3 is chapters 23 through 31, and it's about 60 pages. So I'm going to try to break it up into 2 videos because one video would be really stinking long. So I'm going to get started. Gramps said, "How's your snake leg, Gooseberry?" He was worried about Gram, but less about her leg than her raspy breathing. "We'll stop in the Badlands, okay?" Grams merely nodded. The closer we got to Badlands, the more wicked were the whispers in the air. "Slow down, slow. Maybe we shouldn't go to the Badlands," I suggested. "What? Not go? Of course we should go," Gramps said. "We're almost there. It's a national treasure." My mother must have traveled on this road. What was she thinking about when she saw that sign, or that one, when she reached the spot on the road? My mother did not drive. She was terrified of cars. "I don't like all that speed," she says. "I like to be in control of where I'm going and how fast I'm going." When she said she was going all the way to Lewiston, Idaho on a bus, my father and I were astonished. I could not imagine why she had chosen Idaho. I thought perhaps she had opened an atlas and pointed a finger at any old spot. But later I learned that she had a cousin in Lewiston, Idaho. "I haven't seen her in 15 years," my mother said, "and that's good because she'll tell me what I'm really like." "I can tell you that, sugar," my father said. "No, I mean before I was a wife and a mother. I mean underneath where I am Chanhassen." After driving for so long through the flat South Dakota prairie, it was a shock to come upon the Badlands. It was as if someone had ironed out the rest of South Dakota and smoothed all the hills and valleys and rocks into this spot. Right smack in the middle of flat plains were jagged peaks and steep gorges. Above was a high blue sky, and below were pink and purple and black rocks. You can stand right on the edge of the gorges and see down, down into the most treacherous ravines lined with sharp, rough outcroppings. You expect to see human skeletons dangling here and there. Grams tried to say, "Huzzah, huzzah," but she could not breathe well. "Huzz, huzz," she rasped. Gramps placed a blanket on the ground so that she could sit and look. My mother sent 2 postcards from the Badlands. One of them said, "Salamanca is my left arm. I missed my left arm." I told Gram and Gramps a story that my mother had told me about the high sky, which looked higher here than anywhere else I had been. Long ago, the sky was low that you might bump your head on it if you were not careful, and so low that people sometimes disappeared right into it. People had got a little fed up with this, so they made long poles, and one day they all raised their poles and pushed. They pushed the sky as high as they could. And looky there, Gramps said. They pushed so good the sky stayed put. While I was telling this story, a pregnant woman stood nearby, dabbing her face with a tissue. "That woman looks world weary," Gramps said. He asked her if she would like to rest on our blanket. "I'll go look around," I said. Pregnant women frighten me. When my mother first told me she was pregnant, she added, "At last, we really are going to fill this house with children." At first, I didn't like that idea. What was wrong with having just me? My mother, father, and I were our own little unit. As the baby grew inside her, my mother let me listen to its heartbeat and feel its kicking against her, and I started looking forward to seeing this baby. I hoped it would be a girl, and I would have a sister. Together, my father, my mother, and I decorated the nursery. We painted it sparkling white and hung yellow curtains. My father stripped an old dresser and repainted it. People gave us the tiniest baby clothes. We washed and folded each shirt, each jumpsuit, each sleeper. We bought fresh new cloth diapers because my mother liked to see diapers hanging on the line outside. The one thing we could not do was settle on a name. Nothing seemed quite right. Was perfect enough for this baby. My father seemed more worried about this than my mother. Something will come to us, my mother said. The perfect name will arrive in the air one day. 3 weeks before the baby was due, I was out in the woods behind the farthest field. My father was in town on errands. My mother was scrubbing the floors. She said the scrubbing. She said that scrubbing the floors made her back feel better. My father didn't like her to do this, but she insisted. My mother was not a fragile, sickly woman. It was normal for her to do this sort of thing. In the woods, I climbed an oak, singing my mother's song. Oh, don't fall in love with a sailor boy, a sailor boy, a sailor boy. I climbed higher and higher. Don't fall in love with a sailor boy. Then the branch I stepped on snapped and I grabbed at another, but it was dead and came away in my hands. I fell down, down, as if I were in slow motion. I saw leaves. I knew I was falling. When I came to, I was on the ground with my face pressed in the dirt. My right leg was twisted beneath me, and when I tried to move it, as it felt as if sharp needles were shooting up and down my leg. I tried to drag myself across the ground, but the needle shot up to my brain and made everything black. There was a walloping buzzing in my head. So if her leg's all twisted and she can't move it, that means she probably broke it on her fall. I must have passed out again because the next time I opened my eyes, the woods were darker and the air was cooler. I heard my mother calling. Her voice was distant, faint, and coming. I thought from near the barn. I answered, but my voice was caught in my chest. My mother found me and carried me back through the woods, across the fields, down the long hill to the house. She called my grandparents to take us to the hospital. It took forever just to get the cast, and by the time we got home, we were all exhausted. My father felt awful that he had been away and fussed over both of us constantly. The baby came that night. I heard my father telephoning the doctor. She won't make it, he said. It's happening now, right now. On my new crutches, I tottered down the hall. My mother was sunk into the pillow, sweating and groaning. Something's wrong, she said to my father. She saw me standing there and said, You shouldn't watch. I don't think I'm very good at this. In the hallway outside her room, I lowered myself to the floor. The doctor came. My mother screamed just once, one long, mournful wail, and then it was quiet. The doctor carried the baby out of the room. I asked to see it. It had a pale bluish tinge, and there were marks on its neck where the umbilical cord had strangled it. It might have been dead for hours, the doctor told my father. I just can't exactly say. Was it a boy or a girl? I asked. The doctor whispered, A girl. I asked if I could touch her. She was still a little warm from being inside my mother. She looked so sweet and peaceful, all curled up, and I wanted to hold her, but the doctor said that was not a good idea. I thought maybe if I held her, she would wake up. My father looked shaken, and he didn't seem concerned about the baby any more. He kept going in and touching my mother. He said, It wasn't your fault, Sal. It wasn't because she carried you. You mustn't think that. I didn't believe him. I hobbled into my mother's room and crawled up the bed beside her, and she was staring at the ceiling. Let me hold it, she said. Hold what? The baby, she said. Her voice was odd and silly. My father came in as she asked him for the baby. He leaned down and said, I wish. The baby, she said. It didn't make it, he said. I'll hold the baby, she said. It didn't make it, he repeated. It can't be dead, her voice. It can't be dead, she said in the same sing-song voice. It was just alive a minute ago. I slept beside her until I heard her calling my father. When he turned on the light, I saw the blood spread out all across the bed. It had soaked the sheets and the blankets. It had soaked into my white plaster of my cast. An ambulance came and took her and my father away. Gram and Grams came to stay with me. Grams shook all the sheets and boiled them. She scrubbed the blood from my cast as best she could, but a dark pink stain remained. My father came home from the hospital briefly the next day. What should we name the baby? We should name the baby anyways, he said. Do you have any suggestions? The name came to me from the air. Tulip. I said. My father smiled. Your mother will like that. We'll bury the baby in the little cemetery near the aspen grove where the tulips come up every spring. My mother had 2 operations in the next 2 days. She wouldn't stop bleeding. Later, my mother said they took out all of my equipments. She would not have any more babies. I sat on the edge of the gorge in the Badlands, looking back at Grams and Gramps and a pregnant woman on the blanket. I pretended that it was my mother sitting there and she'd still have the baby and everything would be the way it was supposed to be. And then I tried to imagine my mother sitting here on her trip to Lewiston, Idaho. Did all the people on the bus get out and walk around with her, or did she sit by herself like I was doing? Did she sit here in this spot? Did she see the pink spear? What was she thinking? Was she thinking about me? I picked up a flat stone and sailed it across the gorge where it hit the far wall and plummeted down, down, careening off the jagged outcropping. My mother once told me the Blackfoot story of Napi, the old man who created men and women. To decide if these new people should live forever or die, Napi selected a stone. If the stone floats, he said, you will live forever. If it sinks, you will die. Napi dropped the stone into the water. It sank. People die. Why did Napi use a stone? I asked. Why not a leaf? My mother suggested. If you had been there, you could have made the rock float, she said. She was referring to my habit of skipping stones across the water. I picked up another rock and sailed it across the gorge, and this one hit. This one, too, hit the opposite wall and fell down, down, down. It was not a river, it was a hole. What did I expect? That chapter just breaks my heart. We learned so much about Sal and her family. So we heard earlier in the book that her mom was pregnant once, but then we never heard where's her sibling. So her sibling actually died. The umbilical cord, which is how a baby is connected to their mother to get nutrients and food and stuff, um, was wrapped around its neck and it passed away. So it's so sad, and like I feel like that's like the turning point, like for when her mother started getting sad, because then she had an operation where she wouldn't be able to have any more children at all. Um, so, all she wanted was to fill her house with children, and now she won't be able to. So I think that's super hard on her mom. So that gives us a lot of insight to the story. I'm going to try to do at least 2 more chapters on this video. It's hard, like when their videos are really long, it's harder to upload. But I'm going to go to Birds of Sadness, chapter 24. It's page 152 in my book. As we were leaving the Badlands, Gramps swore at a driver who cut us off. Usually, when Gramps cursed like that, Gram threatened to go back to the Eggman. I don't know the whole story. Just that one time when Gramps was cussing up a storm, Gram ran off with the Eggman, who regularly brought eggs from Gramps. Grandma stayed with the Eggman for 3 days and 3 nights until Gramps came and got her and promised he wouldn't swear anymore. I once asked Gram if she would really go back to the Eggman if Gramps cussed too much. She said, don't tell your grandfather, but I don't mind a few hills and dams. Besides, that Eggman snored to beat the band. So, you don't leave Gramps just because of the cussing? Salamonica, I don't even remember why I did that. Sometimes you know in your heart you love someone, but you have to go away before your head can figure it out. That night, we stayed at a motel outside of Wall, South Dakota. They had one room left with only one bed in it, but Gramps was tired, so he said it would do. The bed was a king-size waterbed. God dang, Grandpa said, looky there. When he pressed his hand on it, it gurgled. Looks like all have to float on this raft together tonight. Gram flopped down on the bed and giggled. Huzzah, huzzah, she said in her raspy voice. She rolled into the middle. Huzz, huzz. As I laid down next to her, and Gramps tentatively sat on the other side. Whoa, he said, I do believe this thing's alive. The 3 of us lay there sloshing around as Gramps turned this way and that. God darn, he said. Tears were streaming down Gramps' face. She was giggling so hard. Gramps said, well, this ain't our marriage bed. That night I dreamed I was floating down the river on a raft with my mother. We were laying on our backs, looking up at the high sky. The sky moved closer and closer to us. There was a sudden popping sound, and then we were up in the sky. Mom looked all around and said, "We can't be dead. We were just alive a minute ago." In the morning, we set out for the Black Hills and Mount Rushmore, hoping to be there by lunchtime. No sooner were we in the car than Graham said, "So what happened to PB's mother? And did PB get any more of those messages?" "I hoped everything turned out all right," Graham said. "I'm a little worried about PB." On the day after Phoebe showed her father the suspicious spots and the unidentified hair strand, another message appeared. "You can't keep the birds of sadness from flying over your head, but you can keep them from nesting in your hair." Phoebe brought the message to school to show me. "The lunatic again," she said. "If he had already kidnapped your mother, why would he still be leaving messages?" "They're clues," she said. At school, people kept asking Phoebe about her mother's business trip to London. She tried to ignore them, but it wasn't always possible. She had to answer some of them, some of the time. When Megan asked Phoebe what sights her mother had seen, Phoebe said, "Buckingham Palace." "Of course," Megan nodded knowingly. "And Big Ben, and," Phoebe was struggling, "Shakespeare's birthplace." "But that's in Stratford-on-Beyond," Megan said. "I thought your mother was in London. Statford is miles away." "Did she go on a day trip or something?" "Yes, that's what she did. She went on a day trip." Phoebe couldn't help it. She looked as if the whole family of birds of sadness were nested in her hair. In English class, Ben had to give his mythology report. He was nervous. He explained that Prometheus stole fire from the sun and gave it to man. Zeus, the chief god, was angry at him and at Prometheus. Angry at man and at Prometheus for taking some of his precious sun. As punishment, Zeus sent Pandora, a woman, to man. Then Zeus claimed Prometheus to a rock and sent vultures down to eat Prometheus's liver. In Ben's nervousness, he mispronounced so he was Prometheus. So what he actually said was that Zeus sent vultures down to eat porpoise's liver. Mary Lou invited both me and Phoebe to dinner that night. Oh wait, did I skip a page? Nope, no, I didn't. Okay. Both Mary Lou invited me and Phoebe to dinner that night. When I phoned my father, he did not seem to mind. I knew he wouldn't. All he said was, "That'll be nice for you, Sal. Maybe I'll go eat over at Margaret's." Dun, 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 dun. Okay, so there was another note from the lunatic. I think we're up to 4 now. Dun, dun. And they had a silly waterbed, which I think is funny. I don't even know if you guys know what waterbeds are because you're so young. They're literally like a bed filled with water. I remember my aunt had one, super silly to sit on. I don't know how anyone could have ever slept on them. Prefer a mattress. I don't think there really are waterbeds anymore. All right, I'm at least going to read chapter 25, and then I'm probably going to stop because this video is getting long. So chapter 25 is called Cholesterol, and it is page 157. Dining at the Finneys was an experience. When we arrived, Mary Lou's brothers were running around like crazy animals, jumping over the furniture and tossing footballs. Mary Lou's older sister Maggie was talking on the telephone and plucking her eyebrows at the same time. Mr. Finney was cooking something in the kitchen. With the help of 4-year-old Tommy, Phoebe whispered, "I am not too optimistic about the possibilities of this meal." When Mrs. Finney straggled in the door at 6 o'clock, Tommy and Dougie and Dennis tugged at various parts of her, all of them talking at once. "Look at this," and Mom, and "me first." She made her way into the kitchen, trailing all 3 of them like a fishhook that had snagged a tangle of old tires and boots and other miscellaneous rubbish. She gave Mr. Finney a sloppy kiss on the lips, and he slipped a piece of cucumber into her mouth. Mary Lou and I sat at the table, although I think it was largely a wasted effort. Everyone descended on the table in a chaotic flurry, knocking over glasses and sending forks onto the floor and picking up plates, which did not match, Phoebe pointed out to me, and saying, "That's my plate. I wanted the daisy plate, and give me the blue one. It's my turn for the blue plate." Phoebe and I sat between Mary Lou and Ben. In the center of the table was a whopping platter of fried chicken. Phoebe said, "Chicken? Fried? I can't eat fried foods. I have a sensitive stomach." I glanced at the 3 pieces of chicken on Ben's plate. You really should. She glanced at the 3 pieces of chicken on Ben's plate. You really shouldn't eat that, Ben. Fried foods aren't good for you. First of all, there's cholesterol. Phoebe removed 2 pieces of chicken from Ben's plate and put them back on the serving platter. Mr. Finney coughed. Mrs. Finney said, "You're not going to eat the chicken then, Phoebe?" Phoebe smiled. "Oh, no, Mrs. Finney. I couldn't possibly. Extra Actually, Mr. Finney, you shouldn't be eating it either. I don't know if you're aware of this, but men should be really careful about their cholesterol." Mr. Finney stared down at his chicken. Mrs. Finney was rolling her lips around peculiarly. By this time, the beans had been passed to Phoebe. "Did you put butter on these beans, Mrs. Finney?" "Yes, I did. Is there something wrong with butter?" "Cholesterol," Phoebe said. Cholesterol in the butter. "Ah," Mrs. Finney said. "Cholesterol." She looked at her husband. "Be careful, dear. There's cholesterol on the beans." They're kind of making fun of her a little bit. I stared at Phoebe. I am sure I was not the only one in the room who wanted to strangle her. Ben pushed his beans to one side of his plate. Maggie picked up a bean and examined it. When the potatoes came around, Phoebe explained that she was on a diet and could not eat starch. The rest of us looked glumly down at our plates. There was nothing at all on Phoebe's plate. Mrs. Finney said, "So what do you eat, Phoebe?" "My mother makes special vegetarian meals, low calorie and no cholesterol. We eat a lot of salads and vegetables. My mom's an excellent cook." She never mentioned the cholesterol and all the pies and brownies her mother made. I wanted to jump in and say, "Phoebe's mother has disappeared, and that is why Phoebe is acting like a complete donkey," but I didn't. "Marvelous," Mrs. Finney said. "And what do you propose to eat tonight?" "I don't suppose you have any unadulterated vegetables?" Unadulterated? Mrs. Finney said. "It means unspoiled, without butter or stuff added." "I know what it means, Phoebe," Mrs. Finney said. "I can eat unadulterated vegetables, or if you have any red bean salad handy, or stuffed cabbage leaves, broccoli and lentil casserole, macaroni and cheese, bleh, vegetarian spaghetti." One by one, everyone at the table turned to stare at Phoebe. Mrs. Finney got up from the table and went into the kitchen. We heard her opening and closing cupboards. She returned to the door. "Mulesey?" she asked Phoebe. "Can you eat mulesey?" Phoebe said, "Oh, yes, I eat mulesey for breakfast." Mrs. Finney disappeared again and returned with a bowl of dried up mulesey and a bottle of milk. "For dinner?" Phoebe asked. She gazed down at the bowl. "I usually eat it with yogurt on top, not milk." Mrs. Finney turned to Mr. Finney. "Dear, did you buy yogurt this week? Blast it! How could I forget the yogurt?" Once again, Mr. and Mrs. Finney are kind of making fun of her a little bit. They probably don't really buy yogurt. Phoebe ate her dried up mulesey without milk. All through dinner, I kept thinking of Bybanks and what it was like when we ate at my grandparents' house for dinner. There was always tons of people, relatives, and neighbors, and lots of confusion. It was a friendly sort of confusion, and it was like that at the Finneys. Tommy spilled 2 glasses of milk. Dennis punched Dougie, and Douglas punched him back. Maggie socked Mary Lou, and Mary Lou flipped a bean at her. Maybe this is what my mother had wanted, I thought, a house full of children and confusion. On the way home, I said, "Didn't everyone seem unusually quiet after dinner?" Phoebe said, "It was probably because all the cholesterol sitting heavily on their stomachs." I asked Phoebe if she wanted to spend the weekend at my house. I'm not sure why I did this. It was an impulse. I had not yet invited anyone to my house. She said, "I guess, that is, if my mother is still." She coughed. "Let's go ask my dad." In the kitchen, her father was washing the dishes. He was wearing a frilly apron over his white shirt and tie. "You're supposed to rinse the soap off," Phoebe said. "And is that cold water you're using? You're supposed to use really, really hot water to kill the germs." He didn't look at Phoebe. I thought maybe he was embarrassed to be caught doing dishes. "You've probably washed that plate enough," Phoebe said. And he had been rubbing it around and around with a dishcloth. He stopped and stared down at the plate. I could practically see the birds of sadness pecking at his head, but Phoebe was busy swatting at her own birds. "Did you call all of Mom's friends?" Phoebe asked. "Phoebe," he said, "I'm looking into this. I'm a little tired. Do you mind if we don't discuss this now?" "But you don't think we should call the police?" "Phoebe, Sal wants to know if I can spend the weekend at her house." "Of course," he said. "But what if Mom comes back while I'm at Sal's? Will you call me? Will you let me know?" "Of course." Or what if she telephones? Maybe I should stay home. I think I should be here if she calls. If she telephones, I'll have her call U.S. House, he said. But if we don't have any news by tomorrow, Phoebe said, we should definitely call the police. We've waited too long already. What if she's tied up somewhere and waiting for us to rescue her? At home that night, I was working on my mythology port when Phoebe called. She was whispering. When she went downstairs to say goodnight to her father, he was sitting in his favorite chair staring at the television, but the television wasn't on. If she, if she did not know her father better, she would have thought had been crying. But her father never cries, she said. All right, I'm going to stop there. Phoebe is being real silly Willy over here. About these stinking cholesterol things, but I think she's just trying to, like Sal said, like she's acting like a donkey because her mom's gone, so she's trying to think not about her mom and think about other things and all that, yada yada yada. And obviously, Phoebe's dad's getting a little bit worried. So that was chapters 23, 24,